Wholemate, which is this new model of relationship, which both beloveds are looking at the wider whole together, when iterated exponentially, heals not only the personal crisis, from roommate to soulmate to wholemate, but actually completely transforms and explodes into oblivion, the meta crisis. Right? We are unique value in the field of value, and we're here to participate in the evolution of value. Value evolves through us even as it's eternal. We participate in value. Value is real. The Father is real. The irreducible dignity of every human life is real. Every human being, right, is an irreducible depth of value. Right? That's the beginning of the new story. And no one's outside the circle. So we turn to David. Oh my God, we turn to David. It's going to resonate our code. We've missed you, David. We can't do this. We've missed you. It's great to see you, man. Resonate our code of one another. Oh my God.
This week's evolutionary love code. We are confronted by crisis, cellular crisis, personal crisis, and meta crisis. Every crisis is a crisis of intimacy. The meta crisis, for example, is a global intimacy disorder. A crisis of intimacy can only be solved by an emergence of a new level of intimacy. The root of the meta crisis is the alienated relationship of the part from the whole. The part is non-intimate with the whole. So a crisis of intimacy is a crisis of relationship. And this crisis is resolved by a new level of relationship. We call homo amor relationships wholemate relationships or evolutionary relationships. Wholemate relationships are an essential dimension of this new story of value in response to the meta crisis. Wholemate relationships are also, not coincidentally, a crucial dimension in response to the personal crisis of love experienced by every human being, whether they are in a roommate or a soulmate relationship, or they refuse to enter into such relationship because it doesn't address their deepest longing. And I'll do it one more time so we can really drop into it. We're confronted by crisis, cellular crisis, personal crisis, and meta crisis. Every crisis is a crisis of intimacy. The meta crisis, for example, is a global intimacy disorder. A crisis of intimacy can only be solved by the emergence of a new level of intimacy. The root of the meta crisis is in the alienated relationship of the part to the whole. The part is non-intimate with the whole. A crisis of intimacy is a crisis of relationship. The crisis is resolved by a new level of relationship. We call homo amor relationships wholemate relationships or evolutionary relationships. Wholemate relationships are an essential dimension of this new story of value in response to the meta crisis. Wholemate relationships are also, not coincidentally, a crucial dimension of in response to the personal crisis of love experienced by every human being, whether they are in a roommate relationship or a soulmate relationship, or they refuse to enter into such relationship because it doesn't address their deepest longing. So it's with that, I'm delighted to turn it back to you, Dr. Marc.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. But have we missed David, everyone? Anyone who's missed David, just write in the chat box, we miss David. Okay, anyone? No, I'm starting there. We miss David, right? Thanks, right? We miss David, right? Oh my God. So he's going to be with us. So we missed him. It's great to have him back. Yay. Okay, you ready, everybody? So we're going to really dive in. And I want to dive into 3 dimensions, right? One, and usually I would recapitulate roommate, soulmate, and wholemate, and then, then only step into it for the people who are, new this week. But hopefully you got enough from the Dharma recapitulation, the beautiful Dharma I'll try and get that word out. Recapitulation by Christina Tahel, and by the code resonated beautifully by David. Neam Cannon, welcome. And so I'm going to step like right into the middle of this conversation. Okay. Let me just maybe just check in the chat box. So everyone gets what we mean by role mate, soulmate, and homemate. So let me just repeat that for a second. By role mate, we mean shared roles, right? 1950s shared roles, bread maker, home maker, bread maker, breadwinner, homemaker. I think we're having a hard time here, right? The old role mate model in which, the masculine is the breadwinner and the woman's the homemaker, defined roles, clarity about roles. Soulmate, we step beyond those roles. We look to each other not for roles. We don't need the roles for survival, but we look for communication, vulnerability, depth, right? We can share our trauma stories. We can hold each other. We look deeply in each other's eyes. And then 3, wholemate, which is we're actually not just looking deeply in each other's eyes, but we actually have a shared horizon. Okay? Now, stay close. Let's see if we can get this. So, 1, we're saying in this code that the crisis in relationship, which is the contemporary crisis of relationship, and what is the crisis? I want to just kind of name it clearly. Soulmate doesn't quite work. Okay, that's generally heresy to say, but it's true. Soulmate doesn't quite work. We thought we would go from roommate and we'd get to soulmate and we would be in Shangri-La. We'd be in blissful heaven forever, looking deeply in each other's eyes. But actually, soulmate in some fundamental way is not working. Now, that doesn't mean we want to go back to roommate. We don't. We don't want to go back to prescribed roles, right? In the rigidity of what was allowed to be as woman or as man. We don't want to go there. We also don't want to go back to a place in which men can't engage their feminine, women can't engage their masculine, for sure. We don't want to go back to a place in which men were forced to perform, right, at very, very dangerous jobs in order to in any way be recognized. We don't want to go back to a place where women didn't have their full dignity in place in the job market. We don't want to go back to any of those things. We don't want to go back to roommate. And yet, soulmate hasn't taken us home. That's a very, very big realization. Okay, let's go even deeper. I want to put 2 structures next to each other, like we began to allude to last week. Pre-tragic, tragic, and post-tragic. Roommate, soulmate, and homemate. So pre-tragic, we said last week, pre-tragic is clarity. Roommate, everything's clear. Soulmate is tragic, and homemate is post-tragic. So a lot of people ask me about this, and I want to just talk about it just for a minute now. Again, why is soulmate possibly tragic? Does everyone get the problem? Well, why is soulmate tragic? Soulmate's supposed to be the apex of our experience. So soulmate is tragic because it has no ground. It's not rooted in the real. And let me try and explain what we mean by that. So number 1, roommate and soulmate in the vast majority of the population is an expression of separate self and ordinary love. And we've talked about this. Separate self, I'm a skin encapsulated ego, separate self. Ordinary love, love as the social construct of these last few centuries. That's utterly insufficient to be the ground of relationship. So we said last week, if in roommate we say, I need you to survive. In soulmate, we say, I choose you. Okay, but let's stay close to this. It's very deep. But if I choose you in soulmate, what's that choice based on? And it's such a deep thing. So ultimately, today, that choice isn't based on anything. It's not grounded in the field of value. And if my choice is not grounded in the field of value, then there's no choice that will ever be ultimately compelling, because there's no field of value. Choice itself is not a value. As we said last week, choice itself is attacked and thought to be illusory, even as a reality, right? There is no real choice. There's no value of choice. There's no value of freedom. So basing my relationship on I choose you makes the relationship tragic, because there's no ground for that choice, which is why in the majority of couples in the United States, for example, and in many parts of Europe, unchose, right? More than 50% of couples divorce because the choice is not compelling. Why would you stay in that choice? Now, again, in many ways, divorce was a great step forward, but divorce was a step forward because as role mates, we were forced and choice was taken away from us. So we reclaimed choice, right, in the act of divorce. That was beautiful. But then we thought, okay, let's step into soulmates. Once we're in soulmates and we're actually choosing ourselves, we won't need divorce anymore. But of course, divorce still skyrockets. Well, so part of the reason is because we make bad choices, because we think we're choosing, but actually there's hidden scripts that are choosing for us. So we need to clarify those hidden scripts in order to clarify and actually be able to really choose. Well, that's true. And that's beautiful. That's beautiful. But there's a deeper ground for the collapse of marriage. The collapse of marriage is both the collapse of people staying in marriage, but it's also the collapse of joy within marriage, right? Where joy is no longer available and sexuality is no longer available and real intimacy is no longer available, right? And so it becomes tragic on both sides. Either it's tragic because the choice doesn't follow through, because we lose access to the memory of what brought us together, and we wind up splitting, usually in a horrifically traumatic and acrimonious way. Tragic one, right? Tragic two is when we stay in, we lose access to the field of joy. We lose access to our aliveness, right? We actually enter in a kind of routinized ennui and deadness, right? That no one is actually, right, allowed to name. So there's an enormous tragedy to soulmate. Wow, it's an incredible realization. So we said last week, and this is what I want to focus on this week. What we said last week is that if roommate is, I need you to survive, I need you. Soulmate is, I choose you. Roommate's pre-tragic because it has clarity. Soulmate is tragic, both because it's not clear who to choose, both because it's not clear when to abide by the choice and when to reverse the choice, both, right? Two, three, because there's no field of value in which choice is affirmed as a value. So therefore we assume, as most popular therapy books tell us, that who we choose is actually not a basis of our choice, not emergent from our choice, but emergent from the imago of our unfinished business with our parents, one possibility, attachment styles that we need to heal, second possibility. So this I choose you is tragic. So in wholemate, what we do in wholemate is we don't exclude roommate and soulmate. We actually include and transcend the best of both roommate and soulmate. We include roommate in the sense that we're actually both looking beyond ourselves. So in roommate, we're looking beyond ourselves at our immediate circle, right? Our family, our children. And in wholemate, we're looking at a much larger whole. That's number one. Right? Number two, in wholemate, we actually are an expression, a unique expression not of ordinary love, but of outrageous love. Right? That's number two. Number three, right? In wholemate, we're actually coming from our own original wholeness, because the core structure of self that animates wholemate is true self. Right? It's the field of wholeness. Then unique self, I'm a unique whole expression of the field of wholeness. And evolutionary unique self, my unique wholeness can evolve the whole itself. And I can then play my instrument, which is whole onto itself and yet participates in the larger unique self symphony. Okay, so all of this is wholemate. Now at wholemate, it's not I need you in the old sense, I won't survive. It's not I choose you without a ground of choice. It's I choose to need you. I choose to need you. And I want to just be in this with you, for just a couple of minutes, because it's so beautiful and it's so deep. The experience of I choose to need you. Does everyone get that? I choose to need you. Yeah, I could make it myself. Yeah, I could find a way. Yeah, I could re-narrate my life story. Yeah, you're wrong about a lot of things. Yep, and there's a lot I can blame you for. But I choose to stay. But not only do I choose to stay, I choose to allow myself to love you so much that I need you. Right? I choose to need you. Even though I'm whole unto myself, I choose to need you. And only through you can I become more whole. Right? Even though I'm powerful, I choose to in some way be powerless, so that when you get upset with me, even if you're completely wrong and, inappropriate and blowing something way out of the water that doesn't need to be blown out of the water, I'm still madly devastated when you're hurt. And I'm madly devastated because I choose to love you, which means I choose to need you. And I choose to allow myself to be hurt by you. It's the ultimate choice that a person can make. The choice of I choose to need you. It's the ultimate freedom. It's the ultimate dignity. It's actually what it means to love. See, when I love, I actually overcome my separateness. It's not that my separateness disappears, and it's that my separateness lives in paradoxical uniqueness to our union. But it becomes no longer my separateness, which is ultimate, which can't be overcome, but it becomes my uniqueness. Right? I'm in my uniqueness, but not in my separateness anymore. I'm in my uniqueness and in union at the same time. If that's actually what happens. I actually am able, when I love you, right? I need you. And by being willing to need you, by choosing to need you, I make you part of me and I make me part of you. I actually overcome separateness. It's kind of shocking, right? In other words, the ability for me to choose to need you is what allows the love between us to overcome alienation and realize union. And just think about this, and I want to just stay in this for a second. Think about what happens in sexuality. In sexuality, there's a need that emerges. There's a need to be touched. There's a need to hold each other. There's a need to be aroused. Right? And as sexuality in a particular act of sexing proceeds and deepens, the need deepens, doesn't it? Right? At the beginning of sexing, you can take it or leave it. But once you're like 3 minutes before explosion, you're in full need. Right? To stop in the middle would be painful. So that's the sexual models, the erotic and the holy are one. The sexual models Eros, and Eros is the sacred fabric of reality. So the deeper we're in the sexual, the deeper the need emerges. And then there's this choice, I choose to need you, but the choice slowly becomes a choiceless choice. It just becomes the nature of what is, right? I surrender to the need and I become most powerful in that surrender. I become most myself as I step all the way in and I give up my lower will and embrace, right, my higher will. So the capacity to need and to choose to need is the greatest human freedom. It's the greatest human dignity. It's not an instinctive need, right? It's the need that emerges from the dignity of my homo imago Dei, of my divine image, from the dignity of my choice, from the dignity of my power, right? You can't be powerful unless you're able to look at someone and say, not I need you, not I choose you, but I choose to need you. That's post-tragic. Post-tragic is not moving beyond need. It's when need and choice come together. When need and choice come together, I choose to need you. And therefore, love is action in response to need. There is no love which doesn't respond to need. But when love responds to need, union is realized. Does everyone get that? When I feel this urgent coming towards you, when I utterly need you, and then that explodes as love, we come together in a shared field of pathos and a shared field of throbbing, a shared pulsing field of tumescence. And we actually are no longer lonely in that field. Because actually Heidegger was wrong and Irving Yalom was wrong, right? Love does not leave us in our separateness, right? Love actually is the perception and direct realization of our ever, always, already union. We've never not been in union. It's always been that way, right? I choose to need you. Wow, right? And so what we've just done is we found love in a hopeless place, right? Soulmate, the realm of the tragic, wasn't quite working. And what we need is an evolution of relationship, which is an evolution of value, because relationship is the value of reality. And by articulating this new source code, right, this emergence, this rise of whole-mate relationship, we respond to the meta crisis. Here's the last thing, very last thing. The nature of the intimate universe is that all crises at their source are actually one. So one crisis responds to the other crisis. It's like the masters used to say, when a question is asked in one part of the world, an answer that never heard the question, an answer to another question also answers the first question. Let me say it in terms of the crisis. There's the personal crisis of relationship, one crisis. Then there's the meta crisis. Both of those are actually crises of intimacy, right? One's the classical crisis of intimacy between the beloveds. Roommate and soulmate are insufficient. And the second is the global intimacy disorder, right? The intimacy that falls, that collapse between all human beings. And the healing always is in a renewed, but deepened, but reconfigured, but evolved relationship to the whole. To the whole in me. I'm not just separate self, I'm true self and unique self, which are wholeness themselves. And from that wholeness in myself, I can actually embrace the larger whole. Like, wow, that's the evolution of relationship. So the emergence of whole-mate relationship, which addresses the personal crisis of intimacy, which is the personal crisis of relationship, also becomes the new simple first rule, the new principle of reality, which is whole-mate relationships in which both parties are looking together as a larger whole. If you iterate that exponentially to billions of people, and actually couples in the world, whether friendship couples, romantic couples, right, business couples, entrepreneur couples, when couples become no longer in a win-lose metrics with each other, but for the sake of the larger whole, and begin to act exponentially for the larger whole across the world, then we've actually changed the source code of reality itself. The extraction model falls away, the exponential growth curves fall away. We've reconfigured reality by reconfiguring humanity, right? So whole-mate, which is this new model of relationship, which both beloveds are looking at the wider whole together, when iterated exponentially, heals not only the personal crisis, from roommate to soulmate to whole-mate, but actually completely transforms and explodes into oblivion, the meta crisis.